The Working Drummer.
Now kick it.
This is the Working Drummer Podcast, serving up perspectives, experiences, and stories from ground-level working pros. Advice, tips, and secrets on how to build a career in the music business.
Hey everyone, I'm Zack Albetta, and this is Working Drummer Podcast. Today I'm very happy to welcome Peter Erskine to the podcast for the second time. Matthew Crouse interviewed him back in 2016, and when Peter was recently in Atlanta for some clinics and performances at Emory University, he graciously suggested that we do it again, this time with me, and I of course jumped at the chance. I could go on and on in this intro about everything Peter has done in his career and everything he means to the drumming community, but I'm guessing you already know. As always, you can find us at workingdrummer.net, where you can check out past episodes and learn more about who we are and what we're about. You can also find links on our homepage to donate to the podcast, either on a monthly basis through Patreon or on a one-time basis through PayPal. I want to take a minute and thank a couple of our supporters, in particular, Isaac Sanchez out in Southern California, who is making monthly donations through our Patreon page, and Brian Hudson here in Atlanta, who made a generous one-time donation on PayPal. So huge thanks and gratitude to both those guys. If you'd like to donate to the podcast, just head to workingdrummer.net and you'll see buttons for Patreon and PayPal along the right side of our homepage. There are some great incentives for donating, and every donation at every level is greatly appreciated. I also want to let you know that Working Drummer Podcast is now available through Stitcher as well as iTunes. Whichever you use, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a rating and review, and also keep that word of mouth going. Just let somebody know about us digitally or in person. We hit a new high water mark for downloads last month, and we want to keep that momentum going. So we really appreciate everyone out there who's supporting us and helping us grow.
I'd like to introduce you all to Crush Drums by telling you about one of their new lines. They are offering a brand new birch kit called the Sublime Birch Series.
The Sublime Birch is 100% North American birch.
Here's Crush's own Terry Platt talking about some of the cool features of the Sublime Birch Series.
One thing that Crush has always done is on our 14-inch floor toms, we do a 14 by 13. It's got the fullness and depth of a 14 by 14 tom, but you can also, tuning range-wise, manipulate it to sound more like a 14 by 12 for the guys that enjoy that tone as well. It also includes the hoop saver claws that we developed, where we actually have the rubber grommet under the claw protruding through the front of the claw. So if somebody grabs their drum set and sets it down, say on concrete, claw side down, it doesn't scratch up everything.
And here's one of my favorite things about what Crush is doing.
The bearing edges are cut a little more specifically for the drums. Our standard edge is kind of a double 45, and the outside is rounded over so you get some more head contact with the shell. On the bass drum, you'll notice that the resonant side is even rounder than that, and then the batter side is going to be a little bit sharper, just so you get that nice snap out of the kick, but the resonant head really brings the whole shell into the equation of the tone.
You can also find a link to the new Sublime Birch Series in our show notes and see the beautiful finishes and configurations they offer. In the near future, we've got much more to share in regard to Crush Drums and this dynamic company. For now, check out Crush Drums at crushdrum.com.
So I really enjoyed this talk with Peter, as you might imagine. Not unlike his drumming, both his ideas and the way he expresses them are sophisticated but still very accessible, and there's a conscientiousness about him, musically and otherwise, that I think we should all aspire to. So let's get right to it with one of the modern masters, the great Peter Erskine.
I was speaking with Antonio Sanchez, the great drummer and composer. He and his lovely wife came over for lunch, and one of the first things I commented to him was how impressed I was that he's doing a lot of his recording, particularly like the TV score recording for Get Shorty, in his home studio, and running all the Pro Tools stuff. For background, I mentioned I was fairly sophisticated with music sequencing software from the very early days in the mid-1980s. But as audio became a bigger and bigger part of programs like Performer and stuff. I just fell more and more behind the curve for some reason. And Pro Tools just somehow mystifies me. I just have a couple of bumps or hurdles I don't seem to be able to jump over. And so he said, oh, well, that's easy. I learned it by watching YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I said, really? I said, well, that makes sense, I guess. I figured out how to fix one of my vacuum cleaners by watching YouTube.
Right.
And he said, yes, it's pretty good. Of course, teaching at USC, the availability of so much on YouTube is fantastic. But the discussion does turn to like the concern or worry that a lot of musicians are maybe relying more on YouTube for instruction. Mm-hmm. It might be good for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is something I wanted to ask you about because we're at a time now when I would imagine most of your students are young enough to be, quote unquote, born digital or whatever the phrase is. And I mean, how does that affect, the skill set that they come to you with, and how does that affect how you teach them?
Well, the first thing I should say is that the students are coming into my teaching studio, playing at higher levels each successive year than I would expect or might even have thought possible. So something is clearly working in terms of music education in general and drumming education. And it's great that an interested drummer or any musician can find what otherwise would have been long lost performances
right
on demand. When I was young, we would be really lucky if we happened to turn on the TV or knew about some jazz broadcast. It's an incredible resource, and we'll turn to it during lessons, and I subscribe to Spotify just for that instant access to any number of recorded performances that either I want to refer to or the students will. Have you heard this?
Right.
Oh, no, I haven't.
Right.
So that's all pretty great. My only regret for this generation, or maybe one or two prior, is that students will never have that opportunity to sit in front of Art Blakey's drum set and hear him play.
Right.
So drummers of my generation, or maybe the next one, we were still lucky enough to get to witness and experience what that was.
Right.
So, it's not that there aren't other great drummers who have come along, but, these were the people who created the language and the vocabulary of the instrument.
Yeah. And I think maybe, the digital age has caused people to not value live interaction as much, not just in music, but in our culture in general. And like you said, there are plenty of great drummers to go see. You can certainly on any given night go see Antonio Sanchez or Ari Honig or Peter Erskine or anybody who's playing. But when you were young, if you knew that Art Blakey was playing, you were like, I have to go see Art Blakey. And now, a young drummer might get the opportunity to go see somebody and be like, well, I've seen him on YouTube. I've heard him play,
Your use of the word interact. Well, here's one of my visual props that listeners can't see this, but what am I doing?
In the phone.
I'm interacting with you. I was on the airplane yesterday flying home from Chicago, and just everybody's just got their neck down looking into their phone.
Yeah.
it was interesting. There was a woman seated next to me, and she just couldn't stop fidgeting. It was the phone. It was the iPad. It was back to the phone, back to the iPad. Then she took out her computer. And I was really glad I had a book.
An actual book with pages?
An actual book with paper.
Right.
You know, I'm a big fan of the Kindle, and I like having it in my knapsack. But the best reading still seems to be when I'm holding a book.
Right. So you mentioned that like the level of playing that students are coming in with is higher than ever, due in no small part to YouTube and social media and all these resources they have. What's the flip side of it? Are there some bad habits or tendencies that are a result of this digital age that you kind of have to undo or disabuse them of?
To be honest, no, nothing's like screaming like for me to like reveal like, yes, here's the major problem with this. And so the difference maybe, Zach, is that when we were young and we encountered a recording, it was usually 20-some to 30-some minutes in length total. It's kind of amazing to look at albums and see how much music was on them. Oftentimes less than 30 minutes, and you would spend a lot of time with that one recording. You came home from the record store. Wow, I got this album, and because of the size of the packaging, you could really get totally drawn into the photographs and just imagining what it was like in that room or concert hall, wherever they played that music and it was recorded. And you learned every note. Right. By heart. I mean, you knew that album inside out, and you could focus on one instrument, but you of course start paying attention to what the other instruments had done and figuring out one musician made this choice, how the other musicians responded, and so forth. So, that's a different sort of relationship and level of intimacy than having 10,000 or more songs in a pocket device.
Right.
And so, in theory, you say, well, you could be concerned about that let's say that level of intimacy. But the flip side, to use that term, is that my students are just incredibly aware of any number of things. So I'm not really seeing too much of a downside to the wide availability as a small record label entrepreneur. It hasn't made the recording and selling of albums any easier.
Right.
The new album that we're coming out with next month, in early April, is the third Dr. album. It's called On Call. It's a double album. One disc was recorded in the studio, and then the other disc was recorded live while we were touring in Italy. And we all say this about every album, but I think this might actually be maybe the best playing I've gotten captured on disc.
Wow.
And it's a really good album. It might be the last one that we put out. It's the 25th one in our catalog. They say never.
Right.
But availability of a CD versus someone can just stream it if they subscribe to Apple Music or Spotify, and so the return on this revenue return versus the amount of money it costs to record record, to manufacture, to promote a CD, it's just less and less tenable to make these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure what the solution is. People who listen to recordings want recordings.
Yeah.
I know as a freelance musician, I'm spending way less time in studios making albums.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone that makes an album, for the most part, is paying for it out of their own pocket.
Right. Right.
They just have the urge or the need for their music to be recorded.
So you mentioned that you're spending less time in the studio making records. Does that translate to more time out in the world playing gigs?
No.
And is that by choice on your part?
Half and half.
Yeah.
I'm trying to spend more time at home.
Mm-hmm.
My teaching responsibilities at the University of Southern California, I'm teaching at the Thornton School of Music there. That keeps me home for a good chunk of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And then come early summer, I usually find myself flying to either Asia or to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be flying to Europe beginning of May to do some touring with the Dr. M band in Italy. I'm then doing a kind of a career retrospective with the WDR big band that's based in Cologne, Germany. I'll send you a link if you want to put it up of a concert I did there last month with Alan Pasqua.
Please.
And they're just a great big band. I think it's my favorite big band in the world.
Really?
WDR, by the way, stands for Westdeutscher Rundfunk. Rundfunk is German for radio station.
Right.
Westdeutsche was, when there were two German.
Yeah. So a career retrospective.
Yeah, because I've played with them for close to 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've had an association.
Yeah.
With that band, and then what am I doing? Oh, then touring with the great pianist Kenny Werner,
mm-hmm.
along with saxophonist Benjamin Koppel and the bassist Johannes Weidenmuller. It's a project they're calling The Art of the Quartet.
Nice, very cool.
That should be fun.
Yeah.
So it's. I couldn't tell you the exact numbers, but I'm playing live. I'm doing some album recording, doing some film and television recording,
mm-hmm.
A lot of teaching, and somehow it just seems like I'm really busy. So I'm not wanting or complaining for work. I feel very great if I do. But the travel is not nearly as much fun as it used to be.
Right.
It's just a grind.
Yeah, very much. And I mean, you mentioned the lady on the plane who wouldn't stop fidgeting. I'm kind of becoming more and more aware of how air travel and travel in general just does not bring out the best in people. So, and any anecdote about how somebody acted on a plane or in an airport or whatever, I try to just take it with a grain of salt and just, it really just brings out the worst in people because they're stressed out, they're crowded, I think our culture is more anxiety ridden than ever. And
yes,
it doesn't bring the best out in me either.
Well, I haven't seen you on an airplane yet. So.
Well, yeah, I tried just to kind of sit still and be cool and go with things, but I'm 6'5", so it's tough.
Yeah, the unexpected seat flying back in your face. I had a great experience once. I had booked an aisle seat it was either Virgin or JetBlue. I think it was Virgin. And I'm in my seat, and all of a sudden the chair in front of me comes flying back really fast, and we're still boarding the plane. People are boarding, and I guess the fellow was just testing it. But I thought, wow, there's no way I could fly cross country with the threat of that chair back, with no warning.
Right.
Just then, a woman came to sit in the middle seat beside me, and I noticed she was with a gentleman who got in the middle seat in the row behind. Mm-hmm. And as I'm standing up to allow her access to this seat, I turned to the man. I said, "Excuse me, are you traveling together?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Would you like to have my seat so you can sit next to her?" The guy said, "You're willing to trade your aisle seat for my middle seat so we can sit together?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" And the woman turned. She goes, "That's very kind of you." And I kind of got very close to her. I said, "Thank you." I said, "It's on one condition, though." And she said, "What?" I said, "You promised not to put your chair back at all during the flight. Are you okay with that?" She goes, "Yeah, fine." I said, "Good, we got a deal." So now the gentleman takes my seat. I get into the middle seat. On either side of me are pretty large guys.
Right.
So I just looked at both of them, and I kind of smiled. I said, "Okay, gentlemen, let the elbow wars begin." I just figured, let's just address it right away.
Right.
One guy says on the window side, he goes, "Hey, man, that's so cool what you did. You can have my armrest. I'm going to sleep." And the other guy goes, "You can have my armrest too." So all of a sudden, now it's better than first class. I mean, I've got this wonderful space.
Right.
I'm the local hero.
Right.
And yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of what's missing. I mean, we talked about like actual interaction, between people, and whether it's on a plane or, at a sound check or, any interaction you can have, if you can kind of disarm everyone with just a little courtesy and a little humor, it really goes a long way.
That's a very good point, and I'll just add one thing to that, a bit of wisdom that my father told me years ago. He was a psychiatrist, so he had some keen understanding, but he said, "You always need to give something to someone before you try to take something away."
Yeah.
So it was pretty transparent, but there was once a guy across the aisle, and he had introduced himself to the flight crew, and he was making quite a bit of noise, to the extent that not only typing very loudly, but he started doing dictation. And I'm in desperate need of getting some sleep, because when I get to Japan, it's going to be right off the plane, straight to the club.
Right.
Because our flight had gotten canceled the day before. Anyway, so as the stewardess is serving my lunch, I said, "Wow, what's going on with the guy doing the dictation?" And she said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "Well, do you say something or do I?" She said, "Would you mind?" I said, "Yeah, it's fine." So I catch his eye. I said, "Excuse me." I said, "John, right? Your name's John." He goes, "Yeah." And I said, "John, you seem like a nice guy." He goes, "Thanks." I said, "But this talking you're doing into your little recording device is bothersome, and I'm wondering if you might not agree that it'd be more appropriate if you wait till you get to your hotel,
right,
to do that." He sets it down. He gets up out of his chair, and I'm thinking, well, this could turn interesting really quick.
Right.
He extends his hand. He says, "Hey, man, I want to thank you just for being polite and being upfront about it. I didn't realize it was so bothersome. And if it's okay with you, if I could just do one more report, then I'll put it away."
Yep.
And we became we became kind of airplane buddies.
Right.
We had a very enjoyable rest of the flight together. And,
right.
Yeah, I mean, some people. There's a wonderful expression in Japanese, and I can't say it in Japanese, but it translates to someone's ability to either see the air or read the air in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And in Japanese society, it's much more common for someone to be able to read the air. In other words, to get a sense of what's appropriate, what's not, in terms of its impact on other people.
Right.
Otherwise known as just having common courtesy.
Yes.
Common sense or good manners.
Yeah, right.
Not saying something stupid that could prove offensive to someone. And a lot of that, some people, I think, have a pretty natural intuition for that. Others learn. Certainly when you get older, unless you get really grouchy, you tend to calm down about some things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just known as acquiring a philosophy.
Yes.
Which extends to the way you make music.
Just in terms of, giving something before you expect to get, being accommodating before you expect to be accommodated. It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, just, kind of observing some of the other musicians that I play with, for better or for worse, this concept in action. Do you feel that's when is the appropriate time to start teaching students about this concept? Going beyond the quarters and eighths and the rights and the lefts of the drums and talking about how to be a human in the music business.
The last few words of your sentence skewed the question a little bit. But I think any time's a good time, and every lesson I teach, it always returns to the addressing the issue, I'll say, of being musical, and being musical is being mindful, it's being present, it's being in the moment, it's being human. I tell my students at the beginning of their course of study with me, I said, we could make this very simple and very short if you want. And all I need tell you is that just play what you want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
How do you want it to sound? And so a lot of it is, of course, learning about technique, learning about musical form, learning the vocabulary and history of the music, but ultimately learning to, number one, trust yourself as a musical voice, and learning to trust the other musicians.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, I think learning to trust the music.
Right.
Because once you do that, then you certainly don't feel the need to try to impress somebody, because that's an extra musical concern that has nothing to do with anything. Trying to second guess what someone might like, that's an extra musical concern.
Right.
Who cares?
Right.
You can't again second guess. If I see Steve Gadd walk into the club, I have a pretty good idea of what Steve likes or doesn't like, but depending where I am in the arc of whatever music we're playing, that's not what I should be worrying about or thinking about. Mm-hmm. I need to be paying attention to the music, and if he likes it, great. And if he doesn't, well, fine.
Right.
And if he's got some advice like, hey, next time you play that, maybe try doing this. If it's Steve, I'll certainly, listen to it. But, Steve can read the air very well, and he would presume to say something like that.
Right.
It's an example I used to give to students. You're playing, And then all of a sudden, Steve Gadd, Steve Smith, and Vinnie Colaiuta, and Dennis Chambers, whoever.
Right.
A bunch of drummers come in, and your first thought is, gosh, I wish they'd been here for the first set. And it's natural to be self-conscious. I think I can sum it up this way. And I don't know if I mentioned this down in Atlanta, but someone had asked me how my drumming had changed over the years. Mm-hmm. And my reply surprised me because I hadn't formulated the thought before I said it. But I said, well, when I was younger, I used to play as if my life depended on it. Mm-hmm. I said, and now I play as if someone else's life depends on it.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really good for the redundant rehashing, but it's a good sentiment because I think that little shift in perspective or priority is not a bad one.
Yeah. Yeah. And musical generosity is a concept that's, kind of abstract, and it's not something that you can kind of sit a student down and say, here's how you are, here's how you can be musically generous. It's like you said, learning to read the air, learning to trust the music.
It's also a clever tactic because, number one, as drummers, we have to exude the ownership of what we're doing, just like talking about flying, the pilot of the airplane.
Right.
It does no one any good if we're all, wait, this is forward and that's reverse. Wait, this puts it up. Wait. So, drummers who are valued in an ensemble project that confidence. Mm-hmm. At the same time, when people might remark, "Oh, you're incredibly generous. You're very self-effacing when you play," I can smile and take the compliment, but I know that deep down, because like any other drummer, I'm a control freak. By doing that, the way I play, I'm the puppet master. I'm pulling the strings of the ensemble. I'm very much in control. Mm-hmm. And so even though it's not maybe an obvious extrovert amount of drumming, I'm able to direct the music with far more effectiveness and accuracy than if I try to strong arm it.
Right.
So it's just it's a more clever, I think, way of making it front and center, even though no one really is aware that that's what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So it's not, in other words, all I'm saying, it's not selfless.
Right.
I'm very much interested in getting my way musically, mm-hmm. but I won't throw a tantrum if I don't, unless basic musical principles are being violated.
Right.
And then I'm not at all shy to express my displeasure.
Right. But even then, you can express that displeasure in a constructive way, in something that doesn't come off as adversarial, like the guy on the airplane. He was violating a basic kind of manners principle of like talking into his recording device.
Certainly you don't go to war with your fellow musicians and just start pointing fingers and being accusatory. Sometimes when I give direction, I'm in the enviable position. I'm the guest artist. I'm the older guy. People will tend to listen or honor what I say.
Right.
The only thing I don't like, I think, if I'm working with a new group of musicians, is inattention. Mm-hmm. If we're there, and we have to pay attention, and even if it's a student ensemble, I don't expect that every student in an ensemble their goal is to, become the best studio player in this city or that city or whatever. But if we're playing a game of basketball, I want to know that if I want to throw the ball to him or to her, that they're not checking the text on their phone, but
right.
they're involved with the game, because then it's more fun for everybody.
Right.
So it's just being in the moment.
It's interesting you mentioned basketball, because I've played some. I don't anymore because I rolled my ankle a year and a half ago, and just, luckily it was not a serious injury and didn't prevent me from drumming or anything, but it was definitely like the red flag. It was the universe saying, this is a young man's game and you're 37 now and this could. So anyway, but I noticed a phenomenon both in basketball and in music. It's been said a million times before, but the better the players are around you, the better you play. And if people aren't paying attention, if people are in their own world, if they're not aware, if they're not attentive, shit doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And when shit isn't working the way it's supposed to, it's hard to play your best or to feel like you're playing your best when you're playing to survive.
Mm-hmm. If you can't depend on one of your fellow musicians, I mean, for a drummer, that would, the first place the finger would point would be to the bass player.
Mm-hmm.
And you're counting on the bass player to be somewhat consistent in that, providing that foundation, and you go to play a counter rhythm to create a nice little bit of tension or shape, and then they're not there.
Right.
Or they feel like that's a signal, let's open it up.
Mm-hmm.
If that happens, I will take the opportunity to have that discussion
mm-hmm.
with him or her, and to say, if you hear me do a variation, that's not an invitation for you to do it too.
Right.
I'm doing that variation because you're holding it together. One of us needs to play, to be the grown up in the room. So
and it's usually not the drummer.
Well, but I was doing a master class for rhythm sections 2 days ago up in Naperville, Illinois. A gentleman named Pete Ellman has started a high school and middle school jazz festival. It's outside of Chicago. And I was recounting an experience I had with a bass player who I'd never played with, a bass player named, wonderful bassist named David Wong, who plays in the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, mm-hmm. among many other groups in New York. And he was a quiet guy, and I couldn't get a read on, like the vibe. I don't know. We were grouped together to play in this combo at the Stanford Jazz Festival. So, fine. We start playing, and instantly I'm like, oh my God, I love this guy. This is incredible. And I looked at him, and he was staring right at my ride cymbal. Mm. He's watching the stick. And we finish, and I said, okay, who are you? Who did you play with? Right. He said, well, I worked for quite a few years with Roy Haynes. I said, that's where you learned to watch the cymbal?
Mm-hmm.
And he smiled. He said, yeah. I said, wow, bless your heart.
Yeah.
And because Buddy Rich had all his bass players do that. They mm-hmm. watched the ride cymbal, and if bass players will just watch the drummer's ride cymbal, it's a piece of cake.
Yeah. This dovetails with something I wanted to ask you about, because you talked about this relationship between the drummer and the bassist in your clinic in Atlanta. And just yesterday and today, I've been having a conversation on Facebook with a friend of mine in Kansas City, wonderful bassist named Ben Leifer.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of we're just kind of talking around this relationship between the bassist and the drummer, and what their roles are, and to what extent those roles interlock, and to what extent their lanes overlap. How you mentioned the bassist watching your ride cymbal stick. But have you been in situations where it worked the other way around, where you were focused on the bassist right hand to gain some insight into his feel, his touch, etc.?
I mean, the first experience I really had with that was I was imaging the flesh on the finger of the bass player. It was Eddie Gomez. So I didn't have visual contact because he was in an ISO booth. But we were playing a very slow blues. And so I just imaged on his finger on the string, and somehow that image or visualization helped me to really focus somehow on the spatial time. So it was a form of that focus. I mean, the closest I came, it was with Steely Dan watching Donald Fagen's left hand on the keyboard. So it's similar to, like, if a drummer was playing in Ray Charles' band, you always had to watch his foot.
Right.
And with Donald, I would watch his left hand, and then my bass drum would be right when he played the bass notes, part of any rhythm or vamp, and then he was happy. And the very first rehearsal, that's what I did, and I gained his trust because of that.
Yeah.
No, but I can't say I've like tried to really look at a bass player's fingers. It's a one-way street, Zach.
Good. That's the way it should be. No,
with me.
Right. I had an experience when I was in Kansas City. I think for my first couple years there, the bassists that I played with most often were Ben Leifer and another guy named Jeff Harshbarger, who both have a very present tone. They pull pretty hard on the string. So I got used to that, and the first time I played a gig with another bassist named Gerald Spates, I wasn't feeling it. I couldn't figure out what the problem was, if it was me or him or whatever. And I looked at his right hand and I noticed that his touch was just so much lighter on the strings than the bassist I was used to. And as soon as I kind of realized that, I actually changed the way I was hitting the cymbal. I made my touch on the cymbal lighter, and just tried to mimic like the feel and the color of his right hand with my right hand.
Did that work?
It did. It worked beautifully, and I don't know if that would work in every situation, but it just made me aware of like the differences from bassist to bassist and how they actually play the instrument.
The light touch thing is an interesting point because that can be tough. If bass players, like they play gut strings and they really like to pull.
Right.
More often than not, that's indicative of kind of a particular stylistic way of playing in terms of their approach to a rhythm section.
Right.
In other words, it's just a more straight ahead, more swing oriented style, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think how Mark Johnson. I mean, Mark was a fairly light player, but he had a robust pull. Bass players who have a very light action, it's just harder. You're right to feel that thing, and I think I do prefer a bassist who has enough physicality or a physical interaction.
Right.
And I play very, very lightly, and yet there's a definite physical specificness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So every stroke is an action that's initiated, and as opposed to like I'm just letting the sticks kind of bounce.
Right.
If that makes sense.
It does. This is just something that's been on my mind in the last couple days. Just how how bassists and drummers interact, and who is in charge, and how who is in charge can change from gig to gig.
I love what's happening now on electric bass. This bassist works in the Dr. Ump band, Benjamin Shepherd, 26 or 27 now.
Yeah.
From New Zealand, and I was re-listening to some of the music on this latest album, and I'm just kind of dazzled by the way he's playing, because it's unlike the way bass players used to play, and yet. And so there's a lot of motion, and yet it doesn't bother me. It doesn't get in the way of things. He's very aware and very clever of which notes are attacked, the shape of the notes. Some of them connect. He has this really cool legato thing going on. Mm-hmm. He's very aware, and I like it, and I'm noticing some other bass players are doing it. So in general, I think the shape of music is good.
Good.
I think it's good.
Yeah.
The question of when drummers are playing very busy or solos, whatever. Everybody does that. Mm-hmm. I couldn't count the number of long or boring or stupid solos I've played in my life. And now I think I've actually figured out how to play like interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And a big part of that was just me giving myself permission to play what I wanted to hear, to allow my being drawn to melody to play out, and not like feel like I need to do something fast. I mean, the problem with fast and with dense is that depending on the room you're doing it in, it usually just sounds not good.
Right.
It just doesn't. You listen out front, it's just a blob. It's a blur of notes, and or it could be recorded really great. And a lot of these drummers do have excellent execution, but there's only so much. I think that any brain, even the younger brains of today, there's only so much information you can take in.
Right.
So when drummers don't breathe, horn players at least have to breathe. Mm-hmm. Why do people not like Kenny G? I mean, a lot of people do, but why do musicians not like Kenny G? Now, Kenny G is a very nice man, and I think he technically is, is very good at playing the saxophone. Stylistically, it's not my thing, but the one element that bothers me, aside from general aesthetics, is that he, with this circular breathing thing, he never takes a breath.
Right.
And if a keyboard player plays his or her instrument the same way, without breathing, or if a drummer does, we have to remember to take a breath.
Yeah.
Take a breath. And you can listen to any number of keyboard players, but one of the, Herbie, I was talking the other day with Vince Mendoza, and I said, of all the great musicians I've been lucky enough to meet and get to play with, if I had to, highlight one of them as being the greatest musician, I said, I think it would have to be Herbie Hancock. It's his innate rhythmic genius is just unlike anything I've experienced with anyone else. And I've only gotten to play with him a few times. but boy, does he understand space and breathing.
Right. And he strikes me as, going back to the concept of being musically generous, he strikes me as someone who is able to be musically generous without playing down, without dumbing down his playing. And as you were saying, what you were saying about your soloing and how you figured out how to play more interesting stuff and to give yourself permission to play the things you want to hear, I think that what you're talking about is being a more authentic version of your musical identity. And if you play with authenticity, I think that translates to generosity and allows the musicians you play with to also be authentic.
Truthfulness, in other words.
Yeah. Not fronting.
Fronting?
Yeah.
What's that?
Just, putting up a wall of what, like you were saying, what you think people want to hear or something that you think will be impressive or, misrepresenting yourself in that way.
Fronting, huh?
Yeah.
Well, is that some Gen X?
I wouldn't know, Peter. I'm younger than Gen X.
Does that make you millennial? Are you millennial?
No, I think both my wife and I we're 37. She's 38, and I think we're what they call Zennials. X. Oh God. Any. So like we're between Gen X and millennials. I don't know. We're this there have been articles written about our generation because we're the only generation that kind of grew up without the technical the digital revolution and kind of came into it as we came into adulthood. So we had this analog childhood and a digital coming of age sort of. So we're switch hitters in that way, I suppose. But
Zennial. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I guess.
Is that with an X or a Z?
It's X, yeah.
X, Zennials. Wow.
Yeah, because we're between X and millennials.
Wow. You know what? This is going to come in really handy. I have a feeling that when I'm doing the New York Times crossword puzzle.
Yes, I would imagine so.
So where do you go to find a treasure trove of information about vintage drums, custom drums, and legendary drummers? NotSoModernDrummer.com. Since 1988, Not So Modern Drummer is an institution dedicated to researching and documenting the history of modern drums, the art of drum building, and the legendary drummers who play them. The writers and contributors are some of the top vintage and custom drum experts from around the world. Not So Modern Drummer serves as an online gathering place and marketplace for the worldwide community of drummers who buy and sell, collect, preserve, and play these instruments. It also hosts drum-related events that are attended by drummers from all over the world. This website is easy and fun to explore, and the monthly digital magazine subscription is free. So check out NotSoModernDrummer.com.
All right. So what's your favorite iPad app?
I am late to the iPad party. I just got one like 2 months ago. So I'm still, finding my way around it. I downloaded the Fourscore app immediately, just to get charts going, and I'm already loving that. But I'm at the.
Are you using a page turner?
The little foot thing?
Yeah.
No, not yet.
There's a page turner. I think is it called like the Butterfly? Or,
it's ringing a bell. I know what you're talking about. I've seen people use it.
Yeah, I see, because our feet are busy, but I'll activate it with my left hand. And whenever I do the concerto for drum set and orchestra, I'm using the large 12-inch iPad.
Yeah.
On the stand, and people barely even notice it. It's down in front of the drums, and because of the size of the iPad and the way the PDFs were I prepared, I can pretty easily see what I need to see to play the piece. I just haven't committed it to memory because there's just too many shifting bar things, and it's sort of like a big band chart. I kind of want to know where I am. 4-score is great, and it's really nice having this just with my hand. I can advance the pages.
Yeah.
But let me see. What I asked I asked you so I could tell you what mine was.
Right.
I like the New York Times crossword.
I should start doing that because I like playing words with friends. I like the Scrabble thing, but I should do the crossword thing too.
It's fun.
Yeah.
And they're great. Of course, to get our brains working, my wife and I every morning we do Sudoku.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
And, we go to dailysudoku.com and we download and print out each day's Sudoku, and then depending on the level of difficulty, we'll give ourselves little rules. Like if it's really hard, we can write in little number reminders. If it's medium, then no, we just do it. And we don't set time limits, but it's a lot of fun.
Is there a competition? Is there a winner? Does somebody have to take somebody out to dinner?
No. We keep scores. She's generally always ahead.
Yeah.
She's the smart one in the family.
Right. Oh, you too? Your wife too, huh?
Well, we're smart enough that we married people smarter than us. Right.
It reminds me of when George W. Bush was first elected, and Dennis Miller was talking about him, and Dennis Miller said, he's smart enough to know that he's not very smart, so he's surrounding himself with smart people, much the same way a hole surrounds itself with a donut.
That's good. That's the first time I've laughed at a line by Dennis Miller.
Yeah, they're few and far between, but that was pretty good. So a couple of the other things that you mentioned in your clinic really kind of caught my interest. You mentioned when you first started playing the Tama drums, your wife commented to you, "I like how these drums make you play." Mm-hmm. And that got me to thinking about how, to what extent our playing is affected by the instruments we're playing, and to what extent it should be affected. Because, when you're playing backline kits and when you don't have as much consistency as you'd like from gig to gig, my tendency at least is to want to find things that are consistent, like things that I should be able to do on any kit. Mm-hmm. But, the flip side of that is, allow it to color your playing, allow it to, to be in the moment in that way, be in the moment on the gear.
Yeah, it's fun. I remember years ago I sat in this club in Chicago. I think it was Judy Roberts' gig. And the drummer's name, I think, was Phil Greteau, something like that. Mm-hmm. I'd never seen a drum. Every drum, the snare, the toms, all the tom, they were all flat and all the same height. And it was fun. It was just very interesting. I said, "Wow, this is kind of fun." Uh-huh. And something similar, I played with the Steps Ahead. We had a reunion gig up in San Francisco, and it's a long story. The rear window got smashed. I left the drums just for a few minutes in the hotel parking lot in front of the doorman. And all of a sudden I get a phone call, your car's been broken into. So anyway, the next day we're trying to get the rear window replaced. And so Ileana Elias was playing piano, and her drummer, Rafael Beretta, was traveling along because they interrupted their trio tour for these 2 days. So he said, "Hey, they've got good house drums. It's at Kumbwa. There was a Craviotto kit there." He said, "I'll set them up for you." Mm-hmm. Said, "Great, thank you." Yeah. So I get down there just in time for a 3-minute sound check. Mm-hmm. They open the club. The drums were he just set them up much higher than I normally would play. But I was just so grateful that it was a good drum set,
right?
And the hell of the day dealing with this car, the insurance company, and everything else. It was such a cookie just to get to make music again,
right?
and I loved how different it felt. And I was like, wow, this is fun.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, I let it inform me and have fun. And of course, we're taught that you should be able to make any instrument sound good, etc. That said, you and I both know that when we get to play a really good sounding drum, or a drum that makes us sound good,
mm-hmm.
and let's face it, there are differences.
Yeah.
It's pretty irresistible.
Yeah.
And Tama Drums was the last drum company I ever expected to have anything to do with. I remember at the big music trade shows, I'd see the Tama booth. I would just beeline right past it because that was a rock and roll drum set.
Right.
Great for the hard rock guys or the metal players. Even though Elvin, Lenny White, and Billy Cobham had played them back in the day. But a gentleman named Terry Bissett, who's now working with Ludwig Drums, he said, I'd love for you just to try this kit. And it blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it, drum shells do matter. Bearing edges do matter.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get the right combination of drum heads on it, and I generally play the Star drums, but I've started using Star Classics,
mm-hmm.
which are made in China, like some of the, and they're just so easy to tune up and play on. I was spending a lot of time with some other drums, like trying to get the drums to sound like this or that, and I just haven't had a frustrating moment yet.
Yeah.
With Tom.
And
of course, the deal was. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
The deal was predicated on their promising, their willingness and their promise to make a cymbal stand that was like the old Ludwig.
Right, the flat bass.
Yeah. So it's the classic stand, and I love it.
Yeah.
I'm totally happy. I've never been happier playing a drum set.
And when your wife talked about how those drums make you play, I wish I had her so I could ask her. But what do you feel was the difference in what those drums brought out of you as a player?
She heard me playing with as if I had more liberty, more freedom. I was taking more chances. You take more chances when you feel like your safety net is either really good,
right,
or you feel free enough that you don't even care about the safety net.
Right.
It's the joy of flying.
Yeah.
To borrow Tony Williams' album name,
mm-hmm.
79. It's just that. So you feel free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
And it was a freedom. Because to feel free when you're playing means you lose inhibition, and if an instrument can do that, then you don't have to rely on trying to alter your consciousness or anything.
Right.
It's like, wow, the music's doing this, and the basic rule of any instrument is that just like if a pianist sits down at a really great piano, they're going to play better.
Right.
It should inspire you to play better.
Mm-hmm.
And if an instrument makes you work harder to get your sound, find another instrument.
Right. There's a parallel between, what you just said and playing with musicians who might be making life difficult. We mentioned earlier how if everybody is attentive, if everybody's present, then everything works better, and there's that safety net, there's that trust, and you don't have to manhandle the music to try and make it sound good or to try to feel like you're sounding good.
Right.
And I'm realizing the same is absolutely true when you have an instrument you trust, when you have an instrument you love. You're able to take more chances because whatever you play on that instrument is going to sound better just by virtue of the fact that it's that instrument.
Yeah, exactly. And otherwise, you're kind of like playing by the seat of your pants.
Right.
And it can you get on the stage and the sound is all weird, or this is weird, or that's weird, then you just, okay, well, do the best you can.
Right. This is another thing I've been thinking about in recent years, just how to, how to lower my threshold for comfort on stage. How to make the number of things that need to be absolutely perfect lower for me to be happy on a gig and feel like I'm doing well.
Well, yeah, it's known as just shut up and play.
Exactly. But yeah, I've noticed, some musicians I've played with over the years, just any little thing can kind of ruin the experience of playing for them. And I've certainly been guilty of it myself. But whether it's a less than stellar bandmate or a less than stellar instrument, I really feel that it's a choice to enjoy playing.
Yeah, but it is. Years ago, I was invited to. I was hanging out with Michael Brecker and Kenny Kirkland, both of them regrettably no longer with us. And, so Kenny Kirkland was a great piano player. Of course, Michael Brecker, wonderful saxophonist. And we're hanging out in Kenny's loft, and hey, let's jam. So my first thought was, well, there's no bass player here. That's a drag. And Kenny's piano was really beat up. That sounded pretty awful. And the drums were, the pedal. So my whole preoccupation with as we're playing, instead of like, wow, I'm getting to play with Kenny Kirkland, Michael Brecker, right. I'm just focusing on there's no bass player. The drum set's a drag. So I'm kind of almost like doggy paddling through this. Like, at any rate, we stop, and then Michael Brecker's kind of looking at me, puzzled, and he says, "It's really fascinating." I said, "What?" I take a sip from my beer, and he goes, "So I've never played with anyone who on one hand can sound so good, but on the other hand sounds so bad." And I made a face, and he said, I didn't say it to be hurtful. I'm sorry, but it's really fascinating." So, of course, that's something you think about if Michael Brecker says that to you. And right. So I was thinking about it. I was trying to figure, and I knew that I was very, susceptible. If I had good players, I would sound great. If I had bad players, I became weaker than the weakest link. And then I'm at a club in Orlando, Florida, and we went to hear some jazz. The great drummer Don Lamont was leading the house band. The bass player wasn't very good, and as a consequence, as a rhythm section, it somehow didn't sound that great. Zoot Sims is the guest artist. Zoot Sims was a great saxophone player. Google him. Gang.
Right. Yeah.
ZOOTSIMS. Just a wonderful tenor player. Anyway, Zoot comes onto the bandstand after they've played a few tunes, and we're like kind of rolling our eyes. Wow, this doesn't sound very good. I wonder if Don was playing drums. Because any chance to hear Don Lamont play, I would have found thrilling. But at any rate, rhythm section didn't sound very good. Zoot comes on stage. He sounds great. I mean, he sounds exactly like Zoot. And that's when it hit me. I said, you have to be able to sound like you do, and you have to raise your bass line. So that even when this goes wrong, that goes wrong, and nobody cares, that your car broke down or you had a fight or whatever.
Right. Right.
When you're playing. So that's one thing I work on with my students. I say, I want the bass line to be, I don't want your fallback to be the way you played when you were 15 years old. And a lot of adult drummers who would come study with me, I would say that, and I get this look of recognition. I go, yeah, that's exactly what happens when things go south on the bandstand. All of a sudden, I'm playing worse than I did when I was in high school. Hey, this is common, but let's raise that now, and here's how you do that. And if nothing else, the best advice I can give to anyone listening, if you're still listening, you take a deep breath. I take a deep breath. I focus on breathing. I inhale. I'll exhale, which is part of acceptance, part of forgiveness. And you're like, okay, fine.
Right.
I once crapped out John Williams, the great film composer, is directly in front of me, conducting something, and my headphones went out, and I had all of a sudden no click, and Steven Spielberg's there, and John Williams stops. He goes, well, let's do it without the drums. So to myself, I laughed. It was a big Buddha belly laugh to myself. I said, okay, it can't get any worse than it just got. So now let's go.
Right.
And then I moved on, and then the rest of the session was fine. So I wasn't like beating myself in the head, you dummy. Right. For the rest of the day, you just, stuff happens.
Yeah. I like the words acceptance and forgiveness because it seems like we've touched on a lot of concepts here that apply to, music, but also just everyday life. And the idea of, if conditions on a gig are less than perfect, then acceptance and forgiveness of those conditions go a long way to not only how you're going to perform, how you're going to sound, but how you're going to feel doing it. It's a lot easier to just get joy and pleasure from playing if you exercise some acceptance and forgiveness about whatever situation is, potentially a hindrance.
And you'll get the best out of the other players. I mean, I remember plenty of time with steps, I might come off and go, wow, I'm sorry guys, I'm just not. As soon as I said that, they're like, no, man, me too. And then, boom, it all gets better.
Right.
So if you're the first to say, wow, it's, I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble doing this, instead of, being accusatory.
Right.
Usually then the community gathers around and, I was noticing too. And, hey, maybe I'm a little too loud. Is that... And the thing can solve itself very quickly,
right? As
opposed to coming off and, hey man, you're doing this, and hey, you over there, you're making this sound terrible or whatever,
right?
Because then everyone's just going to throw their defenses up.
Yeah. And like you said, even it creates community. It creates, we're in this together. And even if all those problems don't get solved, there's acceptance, there's forgiveness, and there is thus more joy, more community, more, fulfillment through the.
Very good. And I would end this train of thought with one more quality. And it's something that Kenny Werner expressed, and it's a beautiful sentiment, and I think a beautiful goal in making music, and that is the exchange of intimacy.
Yeah.
And of course, that trust, acceptance, forgiveness, all those things. But it's interesting. I wrote an article for Modern Drummer, and they didn't publish it. And it tried to address this, how a lot of these all-star bands that I was starting to hear at festivals, and everyone's wearing in-ears, no one's playing truly acoustically. So there's no sense of the actual balance of the instruments on stage. And there was no exchange of intimacy. Everybody was in their own little condom.
Right.
A musical condom or something.
Yeah.
And when I see plexiglass up on the bandstand, I know, okay, we got problems here. It's just not the way music should be made, I don't think.
Yeah. And ears are so prevalent these days, and I'm using them on a lot of gigs, and we've talked, my partner Matt has talked on the podcast before about how he's been feeling disconnected from the drums, from just the acoustic sound of the drums because he's got the ears in. So I'm thinking lately about ways that, sometimes you just have to use the ears. That's what the gig is, but stay connected to the drums somehow.
The ears are a problem, and I think one of the more regrettable innovations,
really,
of recent times. No, not ears.
Oh, okay.
Beyond ears, I think the subwoofer is really destroying.
Yep.
The way music is played, and anytime I'm sound checking, and it's problematic. You please turn the subwoofers off.
Yep.
I said, well, not down, off.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden we're going, oh yeah, it sounds really good. So these guys that are just so interested in throwing so much bass, and I, if any music industry people are listening, I think it's time that we take back the NAMM show. All these PA companies, you go into a hotel and everyone's throwing so much sub bass audio information out, and it's all competing, and nobody can talk.
Right.
And everything you hear just sounds completely ridiculous and unrealistic, and it's horrible.
Yeah.
And I went to this one drum event, and I said, "It's really awful sounding. Why don't you talk to the sound guys?" Well, they're running sound. I said, "It's your event."
Yeah.
I said, "If you like the way it sounds, fine, but I'll see you later. I can't stick around." I just couldn't stand it.
Right. And you talk about taking back the NAMM show. I think there's an extent to which we can take back the gig too, and just stop deferring so much and so often to the people running sound. Because you know how you're supposed to sound. You know how the drums are supposed to sound.
I'll try to have that conversation. You don't always win it, and I think it's if you're touring, it's possibly short-sighted to not have your own. You need somebody out front to either produce it or to mix it. Mm-hmm. I'm not an engineer, and I may not know the room, but I do know that I like for the audience to lean forward to listen to my music, not to be blasted back in their seats. And,
right.
And, it's not just for everyone's hearing safety, but when it gets that loud, nobody can hear anything after a while.
Right. And, an interaction with a sound guy, if you don't happen to have your own engineer or your own producer there, the conversation with a sound guy can be just like it was with the guy on the plane. It's not a list of demands. It's like, hey, I see you as a human first. Now let's talk about how we want this to sound and how I'm playing and what you can do. And it's a short conversation, but I think so many people aren't willing or aren't able to really have that kind of a constructive conversation. But it is possible. It's not as hard as it sounds.
You know what? I think we've solved a number of the world's smaller problems.
That's why we started this podcast, man. Is to just we saw so many problems and we had the answers. We just Okay. Other podcasts of note, because I like podcasts. My favorite one is Preet Bharara. Are you hip to Preet Bharara? I've heard that name, but I can't say I am.
The name of the podcast is Stay Tuned with Preet, Preet. He was the former Attorney General of the Southern District of New York.
Right, and Trump fired him.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
And he's a brilliant guy, and if you're interested in anything to do with legal matters or ethics, it's a very informative and entertaining listen. So that's the one podcast I recommend. I salute you for doing this podcast.
Thank you.
I think it's really cool.
Thank you.
And I'm actually going to look forward to listening back to this.
Me too. Speaking of people who are regrettably no longer with us, I know Ndugu was a good friend and close colleague of yours, and you mentioned that you went to his memorial service recently, and just hoped you could say a few words about Ndugu and what he meant to you.
Ndugu was, I first got to hear Ndugu's drumming. It was 1970, I think it was 1976, and it was a recording he had made in 1975 with George Duke called "I Love the Blues, She Heard Me Cry."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, whoa, what's going on in Los Angeles? It was so modern and different. And so he was kind of pioneering his own way of playing. And yet he could step into any kind of situation and do the gig, whether it was a swing track with Frank Sinatra or any of the many Michael Jackson tracks he played on.
Right.
To call his smile infectious is not to do it service.
Yeah.
But what really impressed me about Ndugu, number one, all his students, came out of his studio sounding great. But he represented a necessary conscience in our drumming community. He was old school, came to rudiments, really learning the basics. I've always been a bit more conceptual, and with my technical orientations, my requirements were more just having to do with touch.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we were both teaching this way at USC, I think, provided for a nice balance. And he just left us way too soon, and it's been devastating to the school. But he left a very strong mark and a standard, and his teaching studio has now been named for him.
Oh, good.
So everyone will pass through the portal of the Ndugu Chancellor drum studio.
Yeah.
So I think that was appropriate. That was good.
Right.
I did want to mention the new album, On Call, this double album, Peter Erskine and the Dr. Band, with a wonderfully apocalyptic cover. A highway landscape in China with a raging volcano in the distance. We had fun with that. And my book, The Drummer's Lifeline, I co-wrote this with Dave Black from Alfred Music.
Mm-hmm.
And the subtitle was Quick Fixes, Hacks, and Tips of the Trade. And these were just things over the years I kept writing down that just, for one reason or another, didn't seem to qualify to be included in this book or that. So it's a fun read, and it's a handy sized book, and great for drummers or if you're a band director at a school, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two things I just wanted to mention. It was great to see you and all your drummer friends, indeed much of the Atlanta drumming community.
Yeah,
when I was down at Emory University.
Yeah. It was great to have you, man. It was a great event. The drummers kind of got the word out and filled the room.
That was cool. I was very, very impressed. What a great thing.
Yeah.
Wishing everyone a happy spring, and it's all. Try to just make the world a better place. Be kind to one another, and make the best possible music.
Amen. It's great to talk to you, Peter.
Thanks. You too, Zach. Stay well.
Yes.
And I really appreciate the chance to get up on the soapbox with you.
Likewise. It's my favorite place, man.
You and me both.
Right. All right. Hope to see you soon in Atlanta or LA or elsewhere.
Let me know when you come out to the West Coast.
Will do. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Peter for that talk. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. It was a reminder that the musical life you lead and the overall life you lead probably reflect each other, so act accordingly. Come on back next week for Matt Crouse's interview. Thanks as always to Mike Jackson for his technical assistance, and thanks to you for checking us out. Cheers.